Hello everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The day I failed. Again. Imagine sitting in your car, your hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that your knuckles have turned white, while a stranger in a uniform tells you that you have failed. Again. For the fourth time. That was me, 3 years into my life in America, sitting in the parking lot of the California DMV, trying very hard not to cry in front of the examiner who had just crushed my dreams. I had been living in this country for 3 years. I had learned English. I had learned American culture. I had learned how to navigate grocery stores, post offices, and parent-teacher conferences. But I could not, for the life of me, pass the driving test. The examiner, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, looked at me with something between pity and frustration. "Mia," she said slowly, her voice gentle but firm, "you know how to drive. Your parallel parking is perfect. Your signaling is flawless. But you keep hesitating. You keep second-guessing yourself. And in American driving, hesitation is dangerous." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that hesitation was my default setting. That I had been hesitating my entire American life. Hesitating before speaking. Hesitating before asking questions. Hesitating before believing that I belonged. And now, this hesitation was literally stopping me from getting my driver's license. I walked back to my car, got inside, and sat there in silence. My husband had been so hopeful this time. He had spent hours practicing with me. He had taken time off work to drive me to the test. He had told me, "This is the one, Mia. I can feel it." And I had failed him. Again. I didn't call him right away. I just sat there, staring at the dashboard, replaying every mistake in my head. The stop sign I had paused too long at. The lane change I had checked twice instead of once. The turning signal I had left on for 3 extra seconds. Small things. Tiny things. But in the world of American driving, small things meant failure. I finally picked up my phone and called my husband. He answered on the first ring. "How did it go?" His voice was full of hope. I couldn't speak. I just started crying. And then he said something that surprised me. He didn't get angry. He didn't sigh. He didn't say, "I told you so." He said, "Mia, I think it's time we got you a new driving instructor. Not someone who teaches you how to drive. Someone who teaches you how to stop being afraid." I wiped my tears and asked, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I'm going to call a man I know. He's from India. He failed his test 7 times. 7 times, Mia. And now he teaches people like us how to pass." I felt a tiny flicker of hope. But I had no idea that this new instructor would teach me something far more valuable than driving. He would teach me that failure isn't the end of the road. It's just a detour. And sometimes, detours lead you exactly where you need to go. The driving instructor who failed 7 times. I met Raj on a rainy Tuesday morning at a small driving school tucked between a laundromat and a Vietnamese pho restaurant. He was a small man with a big smile and eyes that sparkled with mischief. He didn't look like a driving instructor. He looked like someone's favorite uncle. "So," he said, clasping his hands together, "I hear you've been collecting failure notices like they're Pokemon cards. 4 times. That's impressive." "I only managed 7. I stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. 7? I whispered. 7, he confirmed, nodding proudly. "And now I teach people how to fail better." He gestured for me to sit down, and I did, feeling like I was about to receive the most unusual therapy session of my life. "Tell me, Mia," he said, leaning forward, "why do you think you keep failing?" I opened my mouth to give the same answer I had given everyone. Nervousness. Hesitation. Language barriers. But Raj held up his hand. "No," he said. "That's not the real reason. The real reason is that you're driving like you're still in Vietnam. You're driving with the fear of your mother, the expectations of your husband, and the voice of every person who ever told you that you weren't good enough sitting in the passenger seat." I felt my throat tighten. Because he was right. I wasn't just driving a car. I was driving with the weight of my entire immigrant experience. Every judgment. Every failed attempt. Every moment I had felt like I didn't belong. In America, Raj continued, driving is about confidence. Not skill. Not rules. Confidence. The rules are simple. You can learn them in a day. But confidence? That takes practice. And you, my friend, have been practicing the wrong thing. He handed me a piece of paper with a single sentence written on it. I belong on this road. I deserve to be here. Repeat that out loud, he said. Every day. In the mirror. In the car. Before you start the engine. Say it until you believe it. I wanted to roll my eyes. This was ridiculous. Corny. American self-help nonsense. But I also knew that my way hadn't been working. My way had failed 4 times. And Raj's way had eventually succeeded. Okay, I said, taking the paper. I'll try. Good, Raj said, smiling. Now let's get in the car. And this time, we're going to drive like we own the road. I had no idea that this simple shift in mindset would not only help me pass my driving test, but would also change the way I approached every fear I had ever carried. My husband's unexpected reaction. When I got home from my first lesson with Raj, I was expecting my husband to ask the usual questions. How was it? Did you learn anything? Do you feel more confident? But instead, he was sitting at the kitchen table with a strange expression on his face. He had been doing something I never expected. He had been researching failure. Mia, he said, gesturing for me to sit down, do you know how many times Thomas Edison failed before he invented the light bulb? I stared at him. 1,000? 10,000, he corrected. 10,000 times. And he said something interesting. He said he didn't fail. He just found 10,000 ways that didn't work. I sat down slowly, not sure where this was going. My husband, who had always been so practical, so solution-oriented, was suddenly quoting historical figures and talking about the philosophy of failure. I've been thinking, he continued, about why I was so frustrated with your driving test failures. And I realized something. I wasn't frustrated with you. I was frustrated with myself. Because I wanted to fix it. I wanted to make it better. And I couldn't. He reached across the table and took my hand. But Raj is right. This isn't about fixing you. You're not broken. You're learning. There's a difference. I felt tears prick my eyes. I had spent so long feeling like a failure, like I was letting everyone down. Like my inability to pass this simple test was a reflection of my entire worth as an immigrant, a wife, a mother. And my husband was telling me that I wasn't broken. I was just learning. He handed me a piece of paper. On it, he had written a list. Not a list of driving rules. A list of everything I had already achieved since coming to America. Learned English. Found a job. Made friends. Built a home. Raised 2 children. Overcame culture shock. Navigated a new country. This, he said, pointing to the list, is what failure looks like. It looks like you, Mia. A woman who keeps trying. A woman who doesn't give up. A woman who fails 4 times and still gets back in the car. I looked at the list, and I realized something. I had been so focused on the one thing I hadn't achieved that I had completely forgotten everything I had already done. Failure had been my teacher, not my judge. And my husband, who had always been so quiet about his feelings, was showing me that he saw all of it. He saw me. The next morning, I woke up with a new feeling. It wasn't confidence. Not yet. But it was something close. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone. That my failures didn't define me. That I was part of a bigger story. And that story was still being written. But there was still one person I needed to talk to. One voice that had been haunting me since the very first time I failed. My mother. In Vietnam. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. The phone call to Mom. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar, a balm to my fractured soul. Mia. My daughter. How are you? And I opened my mouth to say, I'm fine, Mom. Everything is great. But what came out was, I failed again. The driving test. For the 4th time. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear my mother breathing, could imagine her sitting in her favorite chair in the living room in Vietnam, processing what I had just told her. And then she said something I never expected. 4 times, she repeated. That's it? I blinked. What do you mean, that's it? My mother laughed. Not a mean laugh. A laugh of recognition. A laugh that said, I know this story better than you think. Mia, she said, do you know how many times I failed my driving test in Vietnam? 6 times. 6 times before I passed. And do you know why I kept failing? I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. Because I was scared, she said. I was scared of the roads. Scared of the other drivers. Scared of making a mistake. And every time I failed, I told myself it was because I wasn't good enough. But the truth was, I was good enough. I just didn't believe it yet. I felt my eyes fill with tears. All these years, I had thought my mother was perfect. That she had never struggled. That she had never known the shame of failure. And now she was telling me that she had been exactly where I was. Mom, I whispered, why didn't you ever tell me this? She sighed. Because I wanted you to think I was strong. But now I realize that strength isn't about never failing. It's about failing and getting back up. And you, my daughter, have gotten back up 4 times. That's strength. That's courage. I couldn't speak. I was crying too hard. My mother, who had never been to America, who had never driven on an American road, who had never faced an American DMV examiner, understood me better than anyone. Because she knew what it felt like to fail. And she knew that failure wasn't the end. Mia, she said, her voice firm now, stop trying to be perfect. Just drive. Just live. Just try. The rest will follow. I hung up the phone feeling lighter than I had in months. My mother had given me permission to fail. She had given me permission to be human. And for the first time, I felt like I could actually do this. But there was still one more lesson I needed to learn. One more piece of the puzzle. And it came from the most unexpected source of all. My daughter. And her innocent question changed everything. The driving instructor's wisdom. On our 3rd lesson together, Raj didn't take me to a parking lot or a quiet street. He took me to the busiest intersection in our town. Cars zooming past. Horns honking. Pedestrians rushing. It was chaos. This is where you learn, he said calmly, as if he had just taken me to a peaceful park. Not in the silence. In the noise. I felt my hands start to shake. Raj, this is crazy. I'm not ready for this. He turned to me with that mischievous smile. Mia, you've been driving for 3 years. You've passed 4 tests in your home country. You know how to operate a car. What you don't know is how to trust yourself. And you'll never learn that in a quiet parking lot. He pointed to the intersection ahead. See that light? It's green. That means go. Not think about going. Not hesitate about going. Just go. I gripped the steering wheel and pressed the gas pedal. The car lurched forward. Good, Raj said. Now, turn left. But remember, the driver behind you doesn't care about your hesitation. They just want to get home. Your hesitation is not their problem. It's yours. That sentence hit me like a lightning bolt. My hesitation was not their problem. It was mine. All those years of hesitating, of second-guessing, of waiting for permission to exist in this country, it wasn't helping anyone. It was only hurting me. Mia, Raj continued, in America, we respect confidence. Not arrogance. Confidence. The ability to say, I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to do it. Your English is good. Your driving is good. But your confidence is holding you back. And you need to let it go. We drove for 2 hours through the busiest streets in town. And slowly, something shifted in me. I stopped second-guessing every turn. I stopped apologizing for existing on the road. I started driving like I belonged there. At the end of the lesson, Raj pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to me. On it was a schedule. A schedule for my 5th test. You're ready, he said. Not because your driving is perfect. Because your mind is ready. I looked at the paper and felt my heart skip a beat. This was it. The 5th attempt. The one I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. But this time, something was different. I wasn't just driving to pass a test. I was driving to prove something to myself. That I could do this. That I belonged on these roads. That failure was not my identity. It was just a stop on the journey. I took the paper and nodded. I'll do it, I said. But Raj, I need to tell you something. He looked at me expectantly. I think you're not just teaching me to drive. You're teaching me how to live. And Raj, the man who had failed 7 times, smiled like he had just won a prize. The day I almost gave up. I woke up the morning of my 5th driving test feeling different. Not confident. Not relaxed. But something else. Something I couldn't quite name. I got dressed. I ate breakfast. I kissed my husband and children goodbye. And then I sat in my car in the driveway and did something I had never done before. I looked in the rearview mirror and said out loud, I belong on this road. I deserve to be here. It felt ridiculous. Corny. Like something from a bad self-help video. But I said it anyway. And then I drove to the DMV. The parking lot looked exactly the same as it had 4 times before. The same gray building. The same nervous faces. The same feeling of dread creeping up my spine. But this time, I didn't let it take over. I walked inside, checked in, and sat down to wait. And that's when it happened. I started to panic. My heart started racing. My palms started sweating. My mind started replaying every mistake I had ever made. Every failed test. Every disappointed look from my husband. Every pitying smile from my mother. I stood up and walked to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror and said, you can do this. But I didn't believe it. I sat back down, and I realized that all of Raj's wisdom, all of my husband's encouragement, all of my mother's stories, none of it mattered if I didn't believe in myself. And right now, in this moment, I didn't. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I wanted to leave. I wanted to go home and crawl back into bed and forget that this whole driving test thing existed. I wanted to be someone else. Someone who didn't have to try so hard. Someone who didn't feel like a failure every single day. But then I remembered something my mother had said. Strength isn't about never failing. It's about failing and getting back up. And I had gotten back up 4 times. I was sitting here, ready to get back up a 5th time. That was strength. That was courage. That was enough. When my name was called, I stood up. I walked to the examiner. I smiled. And I said, I'm ready. I didn't know if I was going to pass. I didn't know if I was going to fail again. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to give up. Not today. Not ever. My children's innocent question. I walked out of the DMV that day with a slip of paper that said I had failed. Again. 5th time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in my car and stared at the dashboard for a very long time. And then I drove home. My husband was at work. The house was quiet. I walked through the front door, and my daughter Lily was sitting on the couch, doing her homework. She looked up at me with those big brown eyes, and I knew she could see the failure written all over my face. Mommy, she said, did you pass? I shook my head. And then she asked the question that would change everything. Are you scared of failing? I opened my mouth to say no. To say that I was fine. To say that everything was okay. But I couldn't lie to her. Not to her. Yes, I whispered. I'm very scared. Lily put down her pencil and walked over to me. She took my hand and led me to the couch. She sat me down and looked at me with the seriousness of a 6-year-old who had just discovered something important. Mommy, she said, when I'm scared of falling off my bike, I just think about how good it feels to ride. And then I try again. And sometimes I fall. But I always get back on. I stared at my daughter. My 6-year-old daughter, who had never failed a driving test, who had never felt the weight of immigration and identity and shame, was teaching me the most important lesson of my life. When did you get so smart? I asked her. She giggled. I learned it from you, Mommy. You always tell me to try again. You always tell me that failing is okay. You always tell me that I'm brave. And then she said something that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. So why don't you believe it for yourself? I started crying. Not sad crying. Relief crying. Because she was right. I had spent years telling my children to be brave, to try again, to never give up. And I had been doing the exact opposite. I had been letting fear win. I had been letting failure define me. I hugged my daughter so tightly, and I promised her that I would try again. Not because I needed to pass a test. Because I needed to show her that I meant what I said. That courage wasn't just something I talked about. It was something I lived. That night, I called Raj and told him I was ready. Ready to try again. Ready to fail again if I had to. Ready to keep going until I got it right. And Raj, the man who had failed 7 times, laughed and said, "Now you're ready." I hung up the phone and looked at the calendar. I scheduled my 6th test for the following week. And for the first time in months, I felt something I had forgotten existed. Hope. The 6th attempt. The morning of my 6th driving test, I woke up before the sun. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel scared. I felt something I had never felt before on test day. Calm. I made breakfast. I packed my bag. I kissed my husband and children goodbye. And then I stood in front of the mirror and said the words that had become my mantra. I belong on this road. I deserve to be here. I didn't feel ridiculous this time. I felt ready. Raj had told me something during our last lesson that had stuck with me. Mia, he said, you're not taking a test. You're taking a drive. That's all it is. A drive. You've done it 1,000 times. You know how to do it. Now you just need to do it without thinking about it. And that was it. The secret. Stop thinking. Stop analyzing. Stop second-guessing. Just drive. I arrived at the DMV and walked inside. The same gray building. The same nervous faces. But this time, I wasn't one of them. I checked in. I sat down. I waited. And when my name was called, I stood up, walked to the examiner, and smiled. Good morning, I said. I'm ready. The examiner, a young man with kind eyes, nodded and walked me to the car. We got in. He checked my mirrors. He checked my signals. He asked me to turn on the headlights. And then he said the words I had been waiting to hear for 2 years. Whenever you're ready. I took a deep breath. I put my hands on the steering wheel. And I drove. I didn't hesitate at the stop signs. I didn't second-guess my lane changes. I didn't leave my turn signal on too long. I just drove. The test took 20 minutes. It felt like 5. When we pulled back into the parking lot, the examiner turned to me with a smile. Mia, he said, you passed. I stared at him. What? You passed, he repeated. You did everything perfectly. No mistakes. No hesitation. You drove like you belonged on the road. Congratulations. I started crying. Right there in the car. In front of a stranger who had just given me the best news of my life. I had done it. I had finally done it. I walked out of the DMV with my passing slip in my hand, and I felt like I was floating. I called my husband. I called my mother. I called Raj. And every single one of them cried with me. But the most beautiful moment came when I got home. My daughter Lily ran to the door and asked, Mommy, did you pass? I nodded. And she hugged me so tightly and said, I knew you could do it, Mommy. I always knew. And in that moment, I realized that passing the test wasn't the victory. The victory was never giving up. The victory was showing my children that failure is not the end. It's just a detour. And detours often lead to the most beautiful destinations. The victory that wasn't about driving. I spent the entire week after passing my driving test feeling like I was walking on clouds. Every time I got in the car, I smiled. Every time I turned the key in the ignition, I felt a rush of pride. I had done it. I had finally done it. But something felt different. It wasn't just the license. It wasn't just the freedom to drive. It was something deeper. Something I couldn't quite name. I drove to Raj's driving school to thank him in person. He was sitting at his desk, drinking tea, looking like he had been expecting me. "So," he said, "you passed." I nodded, unable to stop smiling. Sixth time's the charm. Raj laughed. It was never about the test, Mia. It was about the journey. About learning to trust yourself. He stood up and walked over to a bulletin board on his wall. It was covered in photos. Photos of his students. Photos of people who had failed and failed and failed and then finally succeeded. Every single one of these people, he said, pointing to the board, came to me because they were afraid. Afraid of failure. Afraid of judgment. Afraid of themselves. And every single one of them left with more than a license. They left with confidence. I looked at the photos. Faces of people from all over the world. India. Mexico. China. Russia. Vietnam. People like me. People who had been told they weren't good enough. People who had been told they didn't belong. People who had proven everyone wrong. "Raj," I said, "thank you. Not just for teaching me to drive. For teaching me to believe in myself." He smiled and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You already believed in yourself, Mia. You just forgot. Sometimes, we need someone else to remind us." I drove home that day with a new feeling. It wasn't pride. It wasn't confidence. It was something quieter. Something deeper. It was peace. I had spent 2 years terrified of a driving test. 2 years letting failure define me. 2 years believing that I wasn't good enough, smart enough, American enough. And now I realized that none of that was true. The test wasn't about driving. It was about proving to myself that I could do hard things. That I could fail and get back up. That I could be scared and try anyway. That I could belong in a country that sometimes made me feel like I didn't. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car for a moment, just breathing. My daughter Lily came running out of the house, her face lit up with joy. "Mommy, can we go for a drive?" I laughed. "Yes, baby. We can go for a drive." And as I pulled out of the driveway with my daughter in the passenger seat, I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not the moment I passed the test. But the moment I stopped being afraid. The moment I stopped letting failure define me. The moment I started living. And I knew that whatever came next, whatever failure or challenge or fear was waiting for me, I would be ready. Because I had learned the most important lesson of all. Failure isn't the end. It's just a redirection. And sometimes, redirections lead you exactly where you need to go. Failure redirected me. I sat in my car that evening, the engine off, the keys still in the ignition, and I thought about everything that had led me to this moment. 2 years. 6 attempts. Countless tears. And now, a driver's license. But it wasn't the license that mattered. It was everything I had learned along the way. I thought about Raj, the man who had failed 7 times and turned his failures into a gift for others. I thought about my husband, who had seen my struggle and loved me through it. I thought about my mother, who had shared her own story of failure and reminded me that I wasn't alone. And I thought about my daughter Lily, who had taught me that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about being afraid and trying anyway. I walked into the house and found my family waiting for me. My husband had cooked dinner. My children had made cards. They had celebrated my victory like I had won a gold medal at the Olympics. And in that moment, I realized that my failure had given me something that success never could. It had given me perspective. It had taught me that the most important thing in life isn't achieving your goals. It's who you become along the way. I thought about all the people who had helped me. All the people who had believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. All the people who had shown me that failure isn't a dead end. It's a detour. And detours often lead to the most beautiful destinations. I looked at my daughter, who was coloring a picture of me driving a car, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. "Mommy," she said, "can I have a driving lesson when I'm older?" I laughed. "Absolutely. But only if you promise to fail at least once." She looked at me with confusion. Why would I want to fail? I knelt down beside her and took her hand. Because failure teaches you things that success never will. It teaches you to be brave. To be patient. To be kind. To believe in yourself even when no one else does. And it teaches you that you're stronger than you think. She nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting me anyway. And in that moment, I realized that my journey wasn't just about me. It was about her. About showing her that failure is nothing to be ashamed of. About showing her that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to try anyway. I looked at my family and felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had failed 6 times. But I had also succeeded in ways I never expected. I had learned to trust myself. To believe in myself. To love myself. And I had learned that failure isn't the end of the road. It's just a redirection. And redirections often lead to exactly where you need to go. So if you're watching this, if you've ever failed at something and felt like giving up, I want you to remember this: failure is not your identity. It's just a stop on your journey. And every stop is an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to become more of who you're meant to be. Keep going. Keep trying. Keep believing. Because failure isn't the end. It's just the beginning of something better.